what's your perspective on how to ensure that you're finding the right people for the roles within your organization?
Try to find somebody that meets both needs, having the skill set to be able to, sell at a real high level of competency capability and deep dental expertise or market strategic deep expertise and understanding, in our space and AI platforms. It's near impossible to find the perfect fit. So what I end up doing is actually zooming out and saying at a team level, how do I bring just enough balance in the team that has industry expertise? You can't hire everybody that's got deep domain experience with the highest skill set. We've got to be able to recruit and grow talent. So there are areas of my business that I'm only hiring expertise. There are other areas where I'm kind of taking this blended approach.
Today, we're excited to welcome David McNeil, Chief Revenue Officer at Weave. David oversees sales, customer success, revenue operations, and payments, playing a key role in helping more than 30,000 practices improve patient engagement and drive sustainable growth. With over 25 years of experience in SaaS and go-to-market leadership, David brings a deep understanding of how technology, when implemented thoughtfully, can transform operations and unlock new revenue opportunities. David, it is great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Great to see you. And thanks for inviting me. This is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have a rich background of leadership roles in software and technology companies, and the last 2 years of which have been the Chief Revenue Officer at Weave. I'd be really interested, starting off maybe what some of your observations about the dental industry are, maybe some things that surprised you a little bit, either pleasantly or otherwise, and just kind of some high-level observation.
Yeah, it's great. As we talked about, I come from a long, years of SaaS, a lot in the SMB kind of mid-market space. And, I've still made the move over into healthcare and health tech, which I really love. I feel like we're helping kind of the underserved needs of a market that, really got into it for good and ended up having to figure out they also need to be business owners. And as they do that, they don't really have a lot of the technology expertise that they need to really run their businesses. And so that's where companies like ours step in and really help them kind of take that pressure off. And it's been fun. I'm not sure if you know this, but my wife is a practice owner on the med spa side. And so understanding, what these products mean to them, both from the PMS side as well as the communication and engagement side, it's just awesome to see it kind of in the daily practice. And so this is kind of, for me, I would say, my observation is it's good to be helping businesses that really need the help, that really appreciate it. And, I think my observations is when you get in there and you help them understand there's a better way to do things leveraging technology, they're super appreciative, they're super engaging, they give you plenty of feedback on, what they need and what we can do better and how do we continue to evolve. But it's a much tighter community than anything I've ever been involved in. I've been in, again, general SaaS, kind of meeting the needs of SMB, but when it's so broad, you don't really create deep connections. And here, with the community and being out in the market and being in events, you're seeing a lot of the same people. You're having a lot of deeper conversations. You're building real relationships, and you're seeing it come to life. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely want to get into further the problems that you all are solving for dental practices and groups and organizations. But since I've got you on the show and you have such extensive experience in technology and SaaS, and we kind of sit in similar roles in different companies with SaaS organizations, we were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, but my entire X feed, Twitter, call whatever you want, is filled with the demise of SaaS. And we're seeing in the public markets right now, SaaS really taking a beating, with kind of the premise being that AI is, it used to be software was going to eat the world. And now people are saying, well, AI is going to eat the world, which is going to be bad for SaaS companies. You all are a SaaS platform, acquired an AI business with TrueLark, separate and apart maybe from what's happening at Weave. I'd just be curious as your general observations. Do you think this is overstated? Is it really something to be concerned about? And what do you think the right path moving forward is for software organizations to continue to prove their worth and their value in the marketplace?
Yeah, certainly an interesting time. I think, look, I have a lot of appreciation for what AI has done for the world and for the industry. And I do think there are areas and pockets of the industry that will get definitely impacted by it. If you think about, the LLM models and other things, it's like they're coming in or stepping in, they're taking kind of the most generic needs and they're solving for those needs. And, they're doing it in a much better and more elegant way, right? I remember the days when I used to like stress over writing an email, and now, I draft it up and it's there and it's refined and it's grammar checked and we're ready to go. But that's generic, right? And I think where the companies in SaaS, there'll be some that are get taken out from this. Think about Grammarly or something else, and there's others. I think it's just going to take a bit of time to prove out why they're different and unique in the AI space. And I really think the winners are going to be the larger companies with strong distribution, strong relationship that extend their value using AI versus being disintermediated by it. I think if you think about, HubSpot, where it's a company where I came from, and they have massive distribution. They're in the SMB space, helping kind of the small to mid-sized companies in the CRM space. Yes, you're going to start to see players like OpenAI and others enter that space, but what they solve for is very deep and very unique. And the connection between all the things that happen, marketing and sales and customer success and service, it's a very like nuanced workflow. I know I've been in it for so many years, and to think that something's going to come in and just immediately replace that, I think is just a kind of misnomer. I think what's going to happen is these companies are going to figure out how to take that understanding of that deep workflow, and they're going to apply AI to it, and they're going to superpower it, and they're going to do it with distribution and scale and with compliance and integrity that a small company with three people in a dorm room with a dog just won't be able to compete with. And so I think it's just it's one of these like artificial bubbles that some will survive, some will fail, but ultimately the emergence of AI in complementing application will be the winners. I think what's unique about our space is take those workflows to a whole nother level, right? How is a generic model going to come in and understand the nuances of scheduling in healthcare? All the puts and takes that have to happen to make it work for the patient and for the practice. And, that's something that's a level of expertise that, it would take forever for them to kind of come in and be able to replicate at a way that actually works back for those practices and those patients. So I think we've got a long runway, and I think really we're in the best position to take AI and bring it into our industry. And that's what I'm most excited about. And that's why we made the acquisition we did. And I think it's really going to take everything that we're doing and amplify its effect for everybody involved.
Yeah.
In the meantime, our
I
stock's going to get impacted, and we're going to have to go through the ride, and people have to be patient, and we'll have to re-educate the market on what we're doing and how that's different from generic SaaS that kind of services all. And we'll kind of have to work through that flow. And you and I have been there probably long enough that we've lived through the cycles and the ups and downs, and that's just part of the ride. That's what we sign up for. But I'm very optimistic for what's ahead for both of us.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the workflow call outs is a really astute one and one of the most important elements of it. Would that really specific domain expertise when you're looking at, vertical SaaS or specific industries like healthcare, dental, that are leaving the opportunities for the companies to reinvent and innovate themselves. It will require that, but the strongest companies, I think, will continue to win moving forward as a result.
Yeah.
You've been part of quite a few mergers and acquisitions throughout the course of your career. I'd be curious, any learnings that you've taken that you think might apply also to the dental industry. We work in a space where there's lots of practices that are being acquired weekly, lots of independent practices that sell to DSOs, other groups that are small family-owned groups that are acquiring new businesses. Any kind of general takeaways from all of your experience of integrating teams together and trying to align cultures of two different organizations and how you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think as I've looked at it, I think we're the ones that have been most successful, the ones that, they brought a different and more unique value that wasn't kind of in the current company, right? So if you're just taking, business A and business B, they both do the same thing, and you bring it together for synergies, yeah, there's economic benefit there, but it's not driving a different outcome for either party, right? And therefore it typically comes with strain, stress, and without providing something new and different for the market, new and different for the people involved in the businesses. And I've been fortunate to be kind of on the other side of that, where we're really looking for something that's gonna solve for a customer need that we have not yet been able to solve for. And there's we either going to build it, we're going to partner, or we're going to acquire. In the cases where we acquired for that capability and competency, to take something to market faster and better because they've solved it in a more differentiated and unique way, is where I think we've seen the most value. And if it's just like a grab of revenue and the consolidation, it just you get something out of it, but not the same thing. It's not a 1 + 1 = 3. When I looked at where they've been most successful, first off, it comes at, what we just talked about, complementary value. The second is like cultural fit. Like if you do this and there's misalignment on, how the people think about their teams, think about the customer, think about the business, and you bring those teams together, and it doesn't meld, it just doesn't work. So when looking at potential for acquisition, first you're looking at where and how does this fit into my my current offerings? Is it, bringing extended value to my customers? A lot of dental practices right now are acquiring different types of practices so they can provide a more comprehensive offering to their patient base. And I think that's really valuable, right? And then you got the next thing to make sure that they actually are coming in and they're really a good complement from a cultural perspective, and you don't have to deal with misalignment there. And the third is just align incentives, right? When you come in and the incentives are not tied into really what you want mutually as the outcomes, and one is kind of a one-off incentive to get to this outcome, and that's conflicting with where you're trying to get from a business, and you're trying to manage across those dynamics. It's really hard, and it feels like nobody wins. And then if you make it so generic that it's like, you only get paid when everybody wins, and they're like, it's so far removed from what's in my control, that's also hard too. So getting the incentives aligned takes work, and it takes iteration, and a lot of times I've seen it not work out of the gates. And I think it also takes folks and companies to be comfortable that we don't always get it right, and you've got to iterate on it, and it's better to make the adjustment than try to just kind of say this is what we agreed to and we're going to stick to this till the end and just let it fail, versus saying, hey, this is what we agreed to, we now know something different, how do we adjust, right? How do we make it so that we continue to win together over time?
I want to talk about hiring for a second. As I've kind of progressed through my career, it's become very clear that hiring is one of the most important things that any of us ever do, maybe the most important thing. I've found dental interesting from a software perspective, and kind of debated many times about, well, what are the most important attributes or skill sets to have somebody be successful at selling dental software? And when you think about your organization and maybe any open roles or any hiring that you're doing, how do you weigh things? Is it more important that somebody has a background in technology or in SaaS? Is it more important that somebody has the domain expertise of dental? Are you only looking for somebody that has both? And if so, are you able to actually find them? And so, when you're thinking about this, what's your perspective on how to ensure that you're finding the right people for the roles within your organization?
Yeah, to your point, try to find somebody that meets both needs, having the skill set to be able to sell at a real high level of competency capability, and deep dental expertise or market strategic deep expertise and understanding, in our space, communication platforms and AI platforms. It's not near impossible to find the perfect fit. So what I end up doing is actually zooming out and saying, at a team level, how do I balance that team? And so how do I bring just enough, balance in the team that has industry expertise? How do I bring just enough in that it has proven sales expertise? how do I bring people in that just are raw talent, that just know how to win, know how to develop. They're really super coachable. And when you bring all that together with a team, at a team level, it balances out. I remember when I was at HubSpot and we shifted, launched a new team, and it was really focused on creating more value, extending our value with existing customers. The easy answer would have been like, oh, look, I've got all these great sellers over here. I'm just going to move them over here because they all know how to sell. Instead, what I did is designed it. 1/3 of the team was existing sellers. 1/3 of the team was really talented CSMs that had a propensity to sell, and 1/3 being external, seasoned account managers. And so when I put them all together, it worked. And the account managers had a different discipline for how to really approach an account. Your internal CSMs actually have context for like different systems and processes and how the business works. And the salespeople really knew the discipline of like, all right, I got a quota, got to make this many dials to get to this many outcomes. And again, at an aggregate level, it really worked well, and one taught the other. And so that's kind of the best I've been able to see. And I think just for the economics of our business, you can't hire everybody that's got deep domain experience with the highest skill set. We've got to be able to recruit and grow talent. And so again, that blended model, I think in the DSO space, it's different though. Like I hire people that have been there, done that, walked the floors, know the businesses. We just brought on a new leader for our kind of all post-sales experience. 30 years in the industry, right? She's been in a DSO. She was at Henry Schein. She was at Vine. She's seen scale. I mean, she's phenomenal. And the way she's been able to think about our business has just been a light bulb, right? And so she was a game changer for us. And then she's been able to recruit people that with, 15 years experience that really understand how to, walk the floors of a large scale DSO, really help create value there. And so now we're building out competency. So there are areas of my business that I'm only hiring expertise. There are other areas where I'm kind of taking this blended approach.
Yeah, I really like the holistic view of taking the step back and looking at the needs of the team and recognizing that you can have folks from different paths and different backgrounds that can then complement each other and actually work towards strengthening the organization overall. I am curious, and this is my last software question, but I know there's a lot of tech companies that listen to the show. You were at Salesforce, and if I was reading correctly, VP of Business Development, was that the role when you were there? Was that during the predictable revenue days? Like predictable revenue became the book that was like the gold standard for a long time?
I have a funny story for you, and we didn't talk before this. This is actually kind of cool. So I joined and ran the organization of the business development about, I think it was like 3 or 4 years later than Aaron Ross was there. Aaron Ross is the gentleman that wrote the book, Predictable Revenue. Now, the interesting part of the story is, he left when there were X number of people, right? It was fairly new. Like he created it and built it and sold it to, the idea to Mark Benioff. But like there were like, let's just call it 20 or 30 people doing the job. Like when I stepped in, it was, 110 people. I had to grow to 280 people in, 2.5, 3 years. And so like, he gets all the credit for the book. Then I had to go in and actually like recreate the organization because it had gone adrift, right? And then restructure it in order to be able to hit the new needs of the business and then grow it exponentially in a matter of 3 years. And if that, so it's just kind of interesting kind of living this where I'm like, okay, I really know the book, but, and I'm like, but doing this at, 5, 10, 20x the scale is a different thing, right? And that's kind of where I play. Since then, I went to HubSpot. By the way, the same thing happened. So if you had to do the practical application of
some of the strategies, but at a much larger scale, which of course would create challenges of its own that aren't necessarily probably outlined or shared in the book. It was funny because that was like, that book was the goal. Everyone that was started in any SaaS organization was like, well, I guess I got to read Predictable Revenue so I understand how to build and structure BDR teams. I'd love to hear your perspective, when you think about from, that was back in 2010-ish, 2005, 2010 to now. There's a lot of argument that says like that model doesn't work any longer. And then we're in a vertical space where I think that poses some unique challenges as well to scaling and building business development teams. What do you think like some of the keys are to successfully driving an outbound motion today that you guys are doing at Weave?
Yeah, look, end of the day, it was generic outreach. And it was like, how many dials can I make that produce the outcomes I'm looking for? Now people are just drowning in, that level of outreach and content. And so it's hard to break through. I am very passionate about the need to have outbound from the perspective that, it's not, for me, there's a population that actually doesn't really know what they're missing, right? And it's up to us to bring them that message, right? But you have to bring it to them in a very different way. You have to bring it in a genuine, unique, contextual way that helps them understand that the reason we're reaching out to is we've helped hundreds of thousands of other businesses do something different with our software, and we just want them to know about it. Like, it's just, imagine if you knew this, what it could mean to your business. And if we do it in a real, concerted, genuine, contextual way, then I think it has value. If I think it's just generic and, it's a mass calling, center, then it's not kind of what wins today. And then you've got to use different, means for, it's entertainment. Like, everybody's entertained. So you've got to send them a video, make it really engaging, send them something of value. So send them something like an ebook or something that helps them make the decisions so that it's a give to get. That it's not just, hey, I'd love to hear about your 2026 goals. You mind jumping on the phone with me? Who am I ever going to call back to talk about my goals for my business?
Right.
But tell me that something's happening in the industry that I am not aware of. Tell me that other, like businesses have made investments in areas that I haven't yet, that have changed the success rate of their business, of their people, of their patients. You know what? I'm gonna double click. I want to learn a little bit more, and I may not first double click to go directly to them, but I'm going to do some research. And by the way, with technology now, as they're doing research, it's just informing our people to have more contextual conversation. So the next follow up is, hey, I want to follow back up on this specific topic because we know you're researching it, right? And so now you're just extending the value. So I think there's still a unique place for BDRs and outreach, but it has to be like, my job and my mission in life is to bring a message to market that people need to hear. And I know you're not always searching, and I know you're not always on LinkedIn looking at broadcasts. So I have a job to bring message to market, and my job is to make sure that it lands and also progresses. And so that's just how I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be it'd say okay, you're going to make 1,000 calls and you're going to convert this percentage of them. You're going to have this many meetings, and then boop, this amount of revenue is just going to pop out on the other side.
Right.
And then when everything scaled up with, the advent of outreach and Sales Loft and all these automation tools where the sheer volume of communication became so large, and the laziness, quite frankly, of what was contained in those communications expanded exponentially. How do you think about kind of the balance between velocity and volume, and that personalization, the context, and really trying to add value to the communication that you're sending out to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, you nailed it. It's like it just became lazy prospecting, right? I want to set a sequence. I want to wait to see somebody engage in the sequence, and that's who I'm going to reach out to. And yet the message didn't evolve. It wasn't contextual. And so, I think with today's technology, and quite honestly with AI, I can ingest every reach out that we've done with a prospect over the last 8 years. We can see where they engaged or where they didn't engage. We can also know based on what other messages have been sent out by other folks within the team, and we can connect the dots. Okay, based on this type of persona that we've had this types of interaction with, these are the types of things that they're going to care most about, and just help the rep bring a more appropriate message to market, so it's not so generic. And it's what's amazing is your ability to take all of that insight and just put it in front of a rep in a minute or less, where before that would take all of this research, looking through the Salesforce records, looking at, all the different other, links that we have to tell you based on this persona, this business problem, this and that. And it kind of brings it to the surface and say, oh, and by the way, here's a draft of, 3 different messages that you could send. Now go in and customize it to make sure that it's, specific and unique to your brand and your voice and your other things. So that's where I think we're finding the balance. It's just not a generic, 5-step process. And okay, at step 3,
right.
I jump in and I make a generic call, and, and I'm still coaching, our team to, when you call into a front desk, don't just say I'm calling the doctor to talk about our partnership with, Denticon or Plan TDS. No, how about like actually providing some value, right? So calling because the practices that we most recently talked to are struggling in this area. And, we'd love to see if we can help you, with these types of problems.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about those problems and what Weave is doing to solve them. There's this concept of the front office being a growth engine for a practice. I think same-store growth has been the buzzword for 2-3 years now, but I think the misleading thing about saying, hey, you just have to focus on same-store growth is the requirements for a particular practice to grow are going to be different. Some practices have an issue with patient retention. Some have an issue with patient attraction. Some have an issue with case acceptance. So how do you think about the role that Weave and the products that you have play within a dental practice, and what are you guys solving today?
Yeah, you nailed it. I think what we're trying to solve for is consistency, right? I think what's happened is in the industry right now, think about every one of those examples you just gave. That's just one more thing for a front office person to have to deal with, right? And I say have to deal with, not in a non-passionate way, because they're great humans, but they're just overwhelmed by the number of things that they have to manage on a daily basis. They need to answer the phone when it rings. They need to, answer questions. They need to convert that into, an appointment. They need to make sure that appointment shows up on time. They got to make sure they do the digital intake. They got to make sure they check the insurance. They got to make sure, then after you've done all that day and you've got changes going on and you're managing the handoff, could you outreach to these patients that, haven't come in a while? Could you go make some collection calls? Like, who wants to call for a $23.55 request? That's the last thing they want to do. And unfortunately, there's staff shortages, the expenses are going up. So it's really hard for these practices to find, talented, qualified people to do the job. And, they're the, unfortunately, some of the lower paid staff in a practice, yet everything related to revenue is on their shoulders. So what we're trying to solve for is, how do we bring tools and technology and now AI into play to lessen that burden, make it more predictable, streamline that process so that the patient care can be more focused on human-to-human interaction. And, if we can automate that and now have agentic AI working 24/7, when, the average parent, when we did some research, like when you're thinking about an appointment confirmation, for example, what's the best time to reach out? Well, most practices reach out during normal business hours because that's when they're there to respond. However, the data tells you that it's actually after 6 p.m. Well, after 6 p.m., you do an outreach and there's nobody there to respond when they say, I really need to reschedule tomorrow, the appointment 2 days from now, or I have a question. And so it just puts it in this backlog, and you kind of create this fractured, relationship. Using agentic AI, now we're in a full engaged conversation. So I do an outreach. It's at the best time that the patient wants to hear from us. And the AI is just working on their behalf with the same tone, the same consistency, answering all the questions that it can, helping you manage the schedule, do digital intake, all the things that are necessary to make the patient experience better and make it more consistent. And nobody has to stay after 6 p.m. to do it. So that's a good example where you're trying to drive consistency. And if you think about a DSO, the hundreds and hundreds of staff, some that have been there for 20 and 30 years, some that have been there for 2 to 3 months, And, how do you drive consistency when you've got that degree of variation? And then, different demographics, different markets, different situations. So you can put AI in to take not all of it, but imagine if we could just take 60%, 70% off of the shoulders of that staff, and that staff could actually do the job that they're really there to do, which is to meet the patients where they're at, do human intake, make sure they're feeling valued throughout the process. That's really helps.
From your perspective, how do consumer expectations align with kind of this new world of AI? And I'll kind of explain a little bit more what I mean. Like, okay, so I'm an old guy at this point, and
if you're old,
if
I'm in big trouble.
if I'm gonna call an office, I think I still personally would prefer to speak with a human. Now, I think this is likely going to go by the wayside at some point in the way that we get adjusted to new technologies. Like a couple of years ago, wouldn't have wanted to get in a Waymo. Now I have no issues with riding in a Waymo because they're pretty freaking cool. But when you think about what the expectations of are from patients, and maybe it's a generational thing too, do you see that patient satisfaction is affected at all by whether or not they're speaking with an AI, or they're being communicated with via AI, or they're speaking to a human that's at the front desk?
I think first off, their expectation is that you're going to be available when they need them, right? And you're going to be responsive,
Yep.
and you're going to be engaging, and you're going to be helpful. And the reality is, when a practice is not available, when a patient needs to reschedule, it's frustrating. When you call in a practice, you're put on hold because they're dealing with checking in another patient. It's frustrating. When they're like trying to figure out whether you have the right insurance or not, and they're asking you a bunch of questions, it's frustrating. And so I think the balance is, how do you do it in a genuine human-like way, so that it's more conversational and more natural, so it doesn't feel like a robot that's like not and so more in line with the brand of what the practice is looking for, but deliver the expectations for what that patient needs. I mean, ultimately they just want to, I'm calling in and I have very limited time, and I need to get X, Y, and Z done, and they want it done with the right, with the pleasant tone and as quickly and efficiently as they can. And how often have you called in? I mean, the life of a front office person, again, we own a practice, so I get it, is hard. Like, they're dealing with a difficult, irate customer. They're being asked to, get somebody else in a treatment room. In our case, we're also making sure they're like presenting retail options, at point of sale. They're offering, financing and other things, and then somebody's calling in. It's like, oh, by the way, you're like, can I just get back to you in a few minutes? And the person's like, come on, I'm just trying to I only have 2 minutes, right? So, so I think it's trying to find the balance between that, and the more responsive, the more genuine, the more accurate it is, the better it will be. And I think you're going to see less resistance. If it's robotic, it doesn't answer questions. It puts you through a 5-step cadence to confirm who you are, just to even get you to the answer. Are you an existing patient? Are you a new patient? Do you have,
right.
Oh, now I'm done. But imagine a world which we can support, where you call in just based on your phone number, and it's like, hey, Mike, thanks for calling back. I see you have an appointment on Tuesday at 3:00. Would you like, what would you like to know about that appointment? Anything else I can help you with? It's just all informative. It's like, whoa, all right, well, now you're helpful. So that's, I think, the bridge that we're trying to balance here.
Yeah, I think the consistency call out is super important, and it is one of the biggest challenges that dental practices have. And when you explain it in the way that you just did, with all the different roles, responsibilities, jobs that somebody has to do, it does. I mean, it sounds overwhelming. It's like, wait, this is just like one person, maybe two, maybe three, depending on the size of the practice. But it feels like you're never able to get to all of it. What are some of the results that folks that have used the Weave suite of products have found? Like, how do you measure that consistency? How do you understand whether or not the implementation is being adopted properly? What's the approach there?
Yeah, it does vary based on what the practice priorities are. So, for example, sometimes just they want concierge care, meaning like they just want to make sure no call ever goes missed. On average, during normal business hours, 30% of calls go missed. And then you on top of that, you have all your after hours and weekends. They just want something that's responsive, that captures the intent and the interest of that patient, but they might not want you to schedule it. And so they call it just the goalkeeper. No patient is left behind. Make sure it's super responsive, make sure we have context, and we'll follow up as soon as we can. That's great. And they're happy. There's others that really want to measure it on its throughput, right? So of the intent, was that intent service? Like how many of the inquiries was the AI agent or the missed call text or whatever it is being able to brought through to bookings, right? And did you capture incremental appointments that drove incremental growth? And so we do measure it differently based on the priorities of the practice. And some things we're doing all the way through. Some things we're kind of stepping into it. Let's prove this value first and then this value and this value. But ultimately for me, where I think we see the most value for practices, and we actually I was looking at some data earlier with a large DSO, and we had non-weave practices and weave practices. And what was interesting is I looked at the data, and the performance between the two weren't too far off. But it turns out when you looked at the underlying data that the actual improvements in the show rate and in the bookings rate, the show rate, and what was the other one? There was another point of data we're looking at was up 7% as compared to the previous year. So like when you look at it, you're like, oh, well, what that tells us is they went to their most strained practices that didn't have the resourcing they needed to kind of serve the needs. And they're getting 7 to 8% lift year over year for where they've deployed Weave. And then you've got the late adopters that are kind of already doing it kind of the way they generally need. They have the right staffing, but they could also get benefit over time, right? And particularly as is more consistent. Yeah. So it's like, I think you really got to look at from their perspective of what problem you're solving, and where do we seam into that, and what are you measuring? Some others are very much oriented to, some practices are very much oriented to new patient acquisition. Some are like, okay, I need to grow that by 3 to 5% per year, but then I need to extend my treatment, the number of treatments I'm giving, by another 3 to 5% a year. So that means recall. That means presenting buy now, pay later, so your treatment conversions are going up. And so again, depending on which one they're leaning on, if they're leaning on both, where do we fit into those work streams? And the great news is we support new patient intake, so basically conversion at the front end. We also do appointment reminders, so we support the show rate. We also do recall for patients that came in and need to come back for their annual cleaning or biannual cleaning, and then other treatment recommendations. We also help identify missed treatment opportunities, unscheduled treatments. There's like a massive, we were talking to one DSO, $150 million of unscheduled treatment just sitting there. But it's all dependent on somebody reaching out to that patient. But reaching out to the patient to say you have an unscheduled treatment without context is like, well, what if you reach out to that patient and says, as a reminder, you were in, a month and a half ago, we recommended this type of treatment. It's really important you come in. And then imagine if you actually provide like a link to the visualization from like an Overjet or a Pearl, or, and you say, oh, here's just a reminder, here's a visual of what we talked about. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, and then what if you tell them you're already been approved for, through insurance reimbursement? This is how much you're going to, you'll need to pay out of pocket. Oh, here's a financing option that, if that's a concern. So you can take them through this like journey that again helps that patient be more comfortable coming in, getting the services they expect at the price that they expect at the time they expect. And if we can facilitate that, then we're driving this, a ton of value for revenue that was identified but never followed up on. And other practices, we're all about new patient conversion, because the phone never goes unanswered. There's always something on the other end to kind of make sure that they're, they don't go to another practice because you're being super responsive. You're doing real-time booking and scheduling with, either a person in the office or an AI agent. So again, I think it just depends on And then we have others that are just all about collection, right? It's like, no,
Yeah.
we're waiting
Yeah.
45 days. The bill goes out. We're hoping they pay in the first time, but most often they don't. And then we got to do this outreach. Imagine if we could just say, as soon as we knew the remaining balance due, you send out a text as a reminder, say, hey, we got your final statement. Here's a link to that statement. Here's you owe $33.22. Would you like to make a payment here? One click back. Like, so I think it's really kind of in all those different use cases where we're either supporting today or we're working towards supporting in the very near future.
All right. So I'm curious that, as a practice management provider, there is often a lot of fear at the implementation of the new software. It's a core system of record switch. There's a data conversion. There's a lot of training and there's a lot of change management. And even though we do a lot of really cool things and we enable a lot of really cool things, there is kind of from the front desk often pushback and kind of dismay that their world is effectively being changed from where it was before. Now, when you walk through all of these different benefits, these different workflows that Weave is able to inject itself in to help take things off the plate, I would imagine maybe you guys get excitement at implementation and rollouts from the staff who are looking forward to being relieved of some of their day-to-day burden. But is that the case, or is there still challenges in adoption and buy-in and change management and all
great
of that?
question. It's really interesting, right? Because in some cases, it's the office manager or the office staff that have initiated the inquiry around Weave and are looking for a solution. When they are, that's usually easier because there's something, a problem they're clearly trying to solve. Often it's the practice owner that is like, hey, we've made a decision to go with, Weave, and the person in the front desk, like, I have so much on my plate and you're asking me to make a change at the worst time ever. And I've got these personal things going on top of it. And so it doesn't always work out as we had hoped. And you've got to manage that, like, that push and pull. Or the other one is where they bring it to the practice owner. And they're like, I've made this, really done all this research, made this decision to move to Weave. And they're like, I'm not going to take on another bill at this time. Like, it just, our contract doesn't end up to this thing. So we have to first manage through that. When they get on, I think what we find often is getting them to initial value is pretty straightforward, right? A lot of times they're just this basic needs that, whether it be they don't have a good way to follow up on missed calls, they don't have, digital intake, they don't really have an elegant, reminder solution, whatever it is. We can get them to, like, there's like 5 use cases that are like, when you implement these, they see, immediate value. They're pretty lightweight. We can get them up and running pretty quickly. Where we often have challenges is we got so much more, right? And they're just like, and that stuff just sits on the shelf and they're paying for it. And that was part of why they bought, this edition and not this edition, right? And so all of a sudden they're like, you're in it 3 months, 6 months later, and let's say ABC competitor comes in and offers up, quote unquote, the same capability, for 2/3 of the price, and they're like, geez, maybe I should just look at that. And they're not being thoughtful of, like, actually there's so much more you could get more value. Just never went right. You never did the continuing learning and education adoption, and then they're also sometimes not thinking about the service level, right? It's like, oh, okay, if I move, what's the quality of the solution? What's the support I'm going to get? And so it's not always easy for us to keep them engaged and understanding. And we're always releasing. We just hired a new CTO that is changed everything. He comes he comes from Twilio. He was at Amazon, was at Salesforce, and the level of product innovation with him and we've got a new head of product that's fallen under our COO is awesome. It's so much more innovative. It's constantly changing, but you move their cheese and they're like, okay, that button was always here. It's not there. Why is it not there? And they get frustrated. And then teaching them that, oh, by the way, that button now does 5 things where it used to do 1 thing. Those 5 things were because of value. I want to make sure you know those 5 things. And so we're doing a lot in product. We're doing a lot more through, changing kind of our education platform. We're launching a new customer education team. that's really going deeper with our customers. So, we have to change the way we show up for them as well.
Well, it sounds like there is a lot of exciting things on the horizon for Weave. And David, I appreciate you taking the time today. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
I did too, Mike. This is fantastic. And again, I'll say what I said when we were offline, that I just so much appreciate what you do and the fact you're out there talking to so many leaders and people in the industry and helping us all understand what's happening, how it's evolving, because it's an evolving space. There's a lot to learn. We're all here to, kind of learn from each other and figure this stuff out. And we're doing it for good, not evil. And so I just appreciate what you do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.